On yesterday's date, Thursday, November the 9th, between 10 and 11 a.m., we received a phone call here at the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. One of our detectives spoke to an individual on the phone that shared some information that a possible murder may have occurred in Cherokee County on Harris Trail over the past few days. At that point in time, our investigators felt like that they had received enough information from this caller to reach out to our magistrate to seek a search warrant. They sent officers to the home to just sit outside the home on the public right-of-way to observe the residents, to make sure to watch people coming and going, and just to see what type of activity was taking place there. So the officers went and watched the home, and then we began to go over to the magistrate's office to seek search warrants. But before we get into that point, I want to back up just a couple of days so we can get the timelines right, so everybody's on the same sheet of music. On November the 3rd, on Friday evening, we were dispatched to a fight call at that particular mobile home on Harris Trail. Officers were dispatched to the home about a possible fight. While en route, dispatch received a call from the folks in the home that said that the officers could disregard, that their response was no longer needed. It is our agency policy and procedure that we continue on those calls to make sure that everything's safe and somebody was not forced to call 911 and give them that type of information. So the officers arrived at the home. They in fact talked to Gary James Stone, who later became a victim. He indicated that he and his stepson, Charles Jacob Bridges, had been in an argument, and that his stepson walked away from the residence and everything was okay at that time. He advised the officers that if they could leave, he did not want to report, and that he would be fine after he cooled off, and that he would return. And then on November the 8th, on Wednesday, the family had not heard from their loved one, Gary James Stone, over those past few days. So they contacted the sheriff's office and asked us to conduct a welfare check. The officer went there. Part of the information he received was that the victim's car was parked in the woods at another location. So they went there, and they did not observe a car in that particular area that the caller had provided to our officers. And then they went to the home, and they talked to the individuals there. The two individuals at the home were Dawn Michelle Wilkins, who is a common law spouse of our victim, as well as her stepson, Charles Jacob Bridges. The officers asked could they come into the home, look around for Mr. Stone. They consented. The officers went into the home. They looked for him, did not locate him. They also walked around the property to where his car was parked, looked in the car, did not see anything that was disturbed, anything unusual. At that time they cleared up. They spoke back to the mother, and then there was a question still about the car, and so they went back a second time just to make sure that the car she was talking about was in fact the car in the driveway, and that was the car that she was speaking of. It was not at another residence, another property. It in fact was the same car that was there both times on Wednesday night. And then on Thursday morning, we received a phone call about a possible murder. Investigators then began to seek a search warrant, and around 2 o'clock we obtained a search warrant from the magistrate, and then at 3 p.m. around 3 p.m. we executed that search warrant at Harris Trail. After being on the scene for a little over an hour, our officers began to pull the skirting away from the bottom of the mobile home, and they began to find some bags, some containers that had other bags within those, and in those is actually where they found a body that had been dismembered. And at that point in time, obviously we had a full-fledged investigation going for a murder case. Our investigators began to interview both of the suspects. They obviously were suspects from the beginning there. They initially had told our officers that he had walked away after the fight that night and did not return, and they had not heard from him. We know that they had posted some things on Facebook encouraging him to return back home. And then later on that night, after the initial interview was over with, the stepson asked for our detective to come back and speak with him. They brought him back out for a subsequent interview, and at that point in time, he basically confessed to the murder. And so what I can tell you is this happened sometime late Friday night after our officers came the first time, when the stepson returned back home. They got into another altercation. The altercation took place out in the front yard of the home, so there was no altercation inside the home. Nothing was disturbed. And according to our suspect, he had choked the victim out, and later he stabbed the victim and then pulled the body around to the rear of the home, and he began to dismember the body and place it in containers and hid it underneath the house with the plans to dispose of the remains at a later time. So that's where we are in the investigation. Murder warrants were obtained late last night. Both Charles Jacob Bridges, 18 years of age, was charged with murder, along with common law spouse Dawn Michelle Wilkins. She has been charged with murder as well, and both of them have been in the detention center since last night. The judge denied their bond, and their next court appearance will be a preliminary hearing or an appeal to a circuit court judge to try to attempted bond. And so that's where we are at the moment. I want to personally thank all the officers that were involved who assisted in this investigation. The entire team of investigators led by Captain Ward, Crime Scene Lieutenant Billy Anthony, along with Investigator April Haney. They were relentless in their pursuit of these two murder suspects. Our officers and investigators worked all day Thursday documenting and collecting the evidence at the scene. We maintained an officer presence on site all night long, and that evidence collection and gathering continued at 7 a.m. this morning, and our staff actually relinquished the scene back over to family members a little after 2:30 today. And it certainly was a daunting and gruesome task for officers, but the spirit of cooperation amongst all the officers involved was excellent, and the citizens in Cherokee County can rest safely knowing that these two subjects are off the street. I would ask that everyone continue to remember officers in their prayers after seeing such a gruesome sight, processing that over the next few days. Mentally, it's tough on our officers. Physically, it's tough on our officers when you see such evil that exists in our community and in this world. And please continue to pray for the victims' families. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers during this time. The journey for them to have justice has just begun, and they'll need the community's prayers and support in the days and months ahead. The family elected not to speak today, and they chose not to come to the press conference. They're working to make funeral arrangements this afternoon, and our victim advocate is working with them to help them during this process. So at this time, I'll take any questions. I'll kind of keep it to pretty much what I shared with you. We won't jump too far off on a rabbit trail, but I will take any questions to clarify anything for you anyway.
Sheriff, you said the stepson confessed, so why is the wife charged as well?
We feel that she was a willing participant in everything that took place that night. Again, if they got into a fight, even after we left, all they simply had to do was call 911. I spoke to this young man outside the building last night as we were beginning to walk him over, and I just asked that question. I said, why couldn't you just stop right there? Why didn't you call law enforcement and ask law enforcement to come? At that time, we don't know if he was still alive or not. He says that he was deceased. He has no medical background, no expertise. His mother, seeing that, did not call 911, did not offer to render aid, and she was a willing participant in helping move the body. We're talking about a 200-plus pound victim. The young man who he actually had the altercation with his stepson maybe is 100 pounds. So we felt like that the mother was just as involved, and she could have done more to keep this from ultimately becoming a murder investigation.
And so the initial reason you went to the house on Friday, I think when we talked earlier, there was the victim's mother may have called. Did she actually call and say at that point, or was it solely the call for the fight that brought you out there?
It was a call for the fight. There was some information that was not strictly clarified and vetted when we had talked earlier, but what started our response there on Friday night was the call to 911 for a fight between our victim and the stepson. And then subsequently on Wednesday, the family reached back out to law enforcement and said we still have not heard from him. There'd been no activity on his cell phone, those type things. They were becoming more and more concerned because he had a normal routine. That he reached out to certain particular family members on a regular basis, and it was very unusual for them not to have heard from him over the past few days.
Any idea about what the fight was about?
I will go back and say it's domestic violence related, and that's, again, if we can believe everything that they said. We don't have our victim here to hear his side of the story, but the stepson said that he had overheard the stepfather and his mother arguing, and he didn't like some things that was said, and so he was basically defending his mother's honor, and he made the choice to do